the burning of the library at Alexandria, a tragic loss of art, literature, and history. But we know better now, right? We wouldn't let something like that happen. This is 14 dump trucks worth of video games and other art and paraphernalia from the Atari Corporation that were buried in the desert. According to a CNN article 2 weeks ago, searchers unearthed the grave of E.T. There were 750,000 games and other company material buried. According to the ESRB's video game industry statistics, 67% of households have a video game system. And I'd be willing to bet that everyone in this room has played video games, and many of you do to this day, probably later today. Yet video games are not being properly preserved for future generations. I've collected video games, and I have repaired and maintained consoles and cartridges for the past 10 years, so I feel that I'm pretty qualified to speak on the subject. So what I want to talk to you about today is the importance of preserving video games, the major hurdles in preserving video games, and what I feel is the best solution. So let's grab the controller and hit level 1-1, the problem. Why is it important to preserve video games? This is your history. This is the first generation that was not alive for the birth of video games. To put that in perspective, no one in this room, no one's father, and no one's father's father was alive for the birth of writing, the birth of painting, the birth of dance, or the birth of stage productions. You are literally the first group of people that the loss of this history is hurting. As a result, something has to be done right now to fix this. According to CalStatic in his 12-12-12 article, Practical Limits for the Information Technology Journal, just 1 to 2 bits, not bytes, being lost in a digital file can make it partially or wholly unreadable. CDs get scratched. Magnetic mediums have a half-life of 10 to 20 years. That means that any file that was written on a magnetized disc when you were born has a 1 in 2 chance of even being readable today. This history is happening right now. Games are evolving. When you were born, video games were nothing but a D-pad and 2 buttons. And now they've evolved to whole body movements, playing with characters that live across the globe. So after the first level, we come to the 2 mini-bosses, right? The causes. 1, companies are destroying their products themselves. And 2, preserving digital media is expensive and difficult. Anderson has 2 articles for Gama Sutra that talk about how companies are destroying their own media. January 27th, 2011, Where Video Games Go to Sleep, and February 23rd, 2012, Selecting Save on the Games We Make. He talks about how Atari, after the video game crash of 1984, sold off all their office furniture, but they didn't bother emptying the filing cabinets of source code and production material for games that came out and games that didn't even come out yet. Irem, who has made games like Kung Fu Master and R-Type, told him that they don't have any materials from the 1980s, and that's the decade that they were most influential as a game company. In short, game companies, they get bought out, they merge, they go bankrupt, kind of a lot. There were stories that he told of video game programmers showing up at work and just having a note on the door saying, "Sorry, we went bankrupt," and having no idea what happened to their art. Gutenbrummer, in the 2012 article, Keeping the Game Alive for the International Journal of Digital Curation, talks about hardware and software being hard to keep up. Capacitors leak acid, fuses blow, and they don't even make the chips to replace these old video game systems. Ross, in the New Review of Information Networking article in 2012, Digital Preservation, said that in 20 years of study, digital longevity is shockingly limited. It's just too expensive, it's too difficult, you have to keep up servers. So now it's time for the main boss, the solution. What can be done? The attitude towards video games has to change, as society on a whole and on a local level. according to their website, their own website, the Library of Congress has 3,000 video games just in storage because they don't know how to categorize them. They don't know where to put them. They don't have a Dewey Decimal System for video games. They need to come up with that so that they can use it, so that other libraries can use it. There's no organization of them, and it needs to be standardized. There was a Vending Times article about a video game museum. There's just not enough video game museums. They're smaller. But it was April 29th, Atari Games Co-op artifacts acquired by museum. The ICHC obtained Maze Invaders, which is an arcade game that only 2 are known to exist in the world, and they have an operating one just of 10 days ago, and that's amazing. In an August 15th, 2013 CNN article, video games belong in libraries, only 15% of local libraries carry video games. And that's where we can make a difference. Because if we tell our local libraries that we want them to carry video games, they'll start carrying video games. So as the end credits roll, I hope I've covered why video games are important, the hurdles to preserving them, and what we can do about them. And as daunting as changing the world's opinion on something may seem, change can start with something as little as just talking to your librarian about starting a digital curation section for video games. And this has been kind of a downer as a presentation, all this bad stuff, but it may have taken 30 years, but someone dug up those Atari cartridges. And as we move forward, we have to have a plan in effect to preserve the history that's being made today so that it doesn't get buried in the desert.